How does someone with a voice that gentle end up living with so much fear? Karen Carpenter had one of the most recognizable voices in pop music history. Warm, pure, and unmistakably hers. That contralto could make even a simple melody feel like an embrace. In the 1970s, the Carpenters became one of the era's defining acts, and over time their records reached audiences worldwide on a massive scale. They won major awards.
We still can't believe we even had a record out.
Headlined TV specials, and her voice brought comfort to millions. But Karen herself was suffering in ways almost no one understood. Behind the wholesome image, she was waging a silent battle, one that started with a single photograph and ended with her death at just 32. Her story forced the public to look harder at eating disorders and what they can do to a body, even when a person still looks composed on stage. Karen Ann Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950 in New Haven, Connecticut. When she was 13, her family moved to Downey, California. Richard, her older brother, was already the obvious musical star at home, a piano prodigy with a future everyone seemed to believe in. Their mother, Agnes, encouraged him fiercely, and the family's attention often followed his talent. Karen felt it. She didn't grow up thinking of herself as the gifted one. She was the kid who watched, who listened, who learned how to stay out of the way. Even later, when she was famous, people close to her described a shyness that never fully left. She could walk on stage in front of thousands, sing like she owned the air, and then step off stage and retreat back into herself. In high school, she found the thing that felt like hers: drums. Girls did not usually choose drums in the mid-1960s, and Karen wasn't doing it as a novelty. She practiced constantly, studied technique, and built real skill. She was good enough that classmates and teachers remembered her precision, the way she could hold a groove steady without needing to show off. Performing still scared her. Karen later admitted she got nervous before playing in public, but once she started, she became so absorbed in the music that the crowd faded away. That detail matters, because it shows music wasn't a ladder she climbed, but a place she could hide. When she graduated, she received the John Philip Sousa Band Award, a recognition that said plainly what her family dynamic often made her doubt. She was exceptional. She enrolled at Long Beach State, sang in choir, and began shaping her voice with training, even as drumming remained her first love. Karen and Richard started playing locally, first in small groups, then as the Richard Carpenter Trio. In 1966, they won a Battle of the Bands at the Hollywood Bowl. It was a big moment for two young musicians who were still trying to figure out how to be heard. The bigger break came a few years later when a demo tape reached Herb Alpert, co-founder of A&M Records. Alpert was struck by Karen's voice right away, and the siblings were signed in 1969. Their first album didn't make a splash, but the next year the Carpenters recorded a Burt Bacharach and Hal David song, They Long to Be Close to You. It hit #1, and the balance of the group shifted. Karen stepped forward as the voice at the center of the act. From there, success stacked fast. We've only just begun. Rainy Days and Mondays, Superstar, Top of the World, Yesterday Once More. Songs that sounded soft, steady, and comforting at a time when louder rock dominated the charts. By the end of the decade, the numbers around the Carpenters were huge. Gold singles, gold albums, and record sales counted in the tens of millions. Karen became, in that span, one of the decade's most recognizable female singers. At first, she was the full-time drummer, but as the act grew, her drumming was reduced, and her role as the front woman became the focus. That shift gave her a new kind of power, but it also put her face and body at the center of a machine that never stops evaluating women. For Karen, that shift was complicated. Drumming had been her first identity, the place she felt strong. Singing put her under a different kind of microscope, where every camera angle and every costume could be judged as if it mattered as much as the music. Even when she sounded flawless, She often carried the feeling that she could still be wrong. Success doesn't erase old feelings. Sometimes it gives them better lighting. Karen had grown up craving her mother's approval. In accounts from people who studied her life closely, a painful contrast shows up again and again. On stage, she looked calm and cherished, but offstage, she often felt unloved at home, and her self-esteem stayed fragile, even at the height of fame. That kind of wound doesn't always look like drama. It can look like a polite daughter, a hard worker, the person who smiles through discomfort, the person who does everything right and still feels wrong. By the early 1970s, another pressure entered the room: the camera. Karen's body was now part of the product. TV specials and photo shoots meant her image was constantly being measured. In later accounts, her dieting is traced back to the period after high school. She tried the Stillman water diet, dropped weight quickly, and then leveled off at a slimmer size. Even then, she talked about how hard it could be to eat on tour, with schedules, travel, and constant attention. But the important thing is this: Karen was never medically overweight. What she carried instead was the belief that she was. And beliefs like that don't need facts to survive. They feed on anxiety. For Karen, controlling her body wasn't only about beauty standards. It offered a sense of power in a life where so much felt dictated by others, from her schedule to her image to her career choices. One writer summed up the dynamic in a way that cut straight through the noise. The two things Karen valued most, her voice and her mother's love, felt like they belonged to Richard. At least she could control the size of her own body. And once she realized that, it became a trap. In August 1973, Karen saw a photograph of herself performing at Lake Tahoe. She fixated on what she thought was a little extra weight around her middle. The angle, the outfit, the lighting, none of it mattered. What mattered was that Karen felt exposed by that image. People who later reconstructed that period describe it as the moment her desire to be thinner stopped being casual and became urgent. She resolved to lose weight. At first, it looked ordinary. She hired help. She tried to tone up. She followed a plan. But the biography describes how it backfired. The training built muscle. She didn't see the results she wanted, and watching herself on television later that year made her feel heavier on camera than she should. Even Richard, trying to be honest, agreed she had put on some weight. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't dramatic, but to Karen, it landed hard. She fired the trainer and decided she would do it on her own. Karen approached weight loss with the same meticulous discipline she applied to music. She acquired a portable exercise machine and rode it daily, even taking it on tour so she could work out in hotel rooms. She counted calories obsessively and restricted her food intake. The initial results brought praise, which only encouraged her to keep going. By 1974, she had dropped far below the weight she'd been maintaining, and compliments came in waves. People said she looked fantastic. People said she looked so good. For a woman whose self-worth had always been shaky, those words didn't simply feel nice. They felt like proof. Richard noticed the shift. When Karen mentioned wanting to keep going lower, he grew alarmed. He tried to stop her. He told her she looked good and didn't need to lose more. Karen couldn't stop because it was no longer about looking good. It had become a private contest, and the finish line kept slipping farther away. By the mid-1970s, Karen Carpenter was in the grip of an illness most people didn't know how to recognize. Even the word anorexia wasn't common outside medical circles, and many people saw her behavior as stubbornness. The logic seemed simple. She was too thin, so she should eat. But eating disorders don't obey logic, and they don't respond to lectures. Karen also learned to hide what she was doing. At meals, she would move food around on her plate, then push the rest on other people with cheerful insistence. Later descriptions of those meals show how skilled she became at hiding it. She'd talk up the food, insist everyone try it, and end the evening with a clean plate that didn't reflect what she had actually eaten. When her mother caught on, Karen adjusted. She found other ways to avoid eating under watchful eyes. She disguised her shrinking frame under layers of clothing, even when the weather didn't call for it. Her agent later described the layering as a deliberate strategy: shirt, blouse, sweater, jacket, enough to hide how far things had gone. But people close to her still saw flashes of the truth. A family friend recalled seeing Karen sunbathing privately and being shocked by how gaunt she looked. And on stage, her new wardrobe made the problem harder to hide. The gowns revealed bony shoulders, ribs, hip bones. Audiences sometimes gasped when she walked out. Fans approached the team, worried she might have cancer. Critics commented too, even as they praised her voice. Those reactions underline a tragic fact. People could see something was wrong, but they didn't know what they were looking at. Band members later admitted they didn't even know how to pronounce anorexia nervosa until years later. From the outside, it looked like a simple choice. From inside the illness, it never is. Still, the touring schedule kept grinding. Karen pushed through exhaustion and weakness because the show had to go on. Band members witnessed her lying down between shows, something she had rarely done before, then getting up moments later to perform as if nothing was wrong. By September 1975, Karen's weight had fallen into the low 6-stone range. At that point, the issue was no longer appearance or dieting. Her body was starving, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. That autumn, Karen checked into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she spent several days undergoing tests. Dr. Robert Coblin issued a statement describing her condition as a severe case of physical and nervous exhaustion, and he canceled her upcoming European schedule, warning that continuing would be highly dangerous to her long-term health. The scale of what was canceled showed how serious the moment was. Melody Maker reported that approximately 150,000 people were set to see them during a planned 28-day European trek. Ticket sales for the 50 shows, which sold out in a matter of hours, were refunded, and it was reported the Carpenters may have lost upward of $250,000 due to the canceled concerts. The money made headlines, but it was the wrong headline. The real story was that Karen had reached the edge. Back home under Agnes's watch, Karen slept 14 to 16 hours a day. She later told biographer Ray Coleman, "My mother thought I was dead," explaining that for 2 years she had been running on nervous energy. She gained weight, and for a time it looked like rest might be enough. It wasn't. The late 1970s brought new stress. The Carpenters were still famous, but the cultural tide was changing. Disco rose, rock shifted, and the duo's soft pop style didn't dominate the same way it had earlier in the decade. Inside the band, Richard struggled too. He developed an addiction to Quaaludes and entered treatment, and the Carpenters paused their work. For Karen, that meant the one structure she'd always relied on, the duo itself, suddenly felt uncertain. During that break, Karen tried to take one step toward independence. In New York, she recorded a solo album with Phil Ramone, exploring material that didn't sound like classic Carpenters. It mattered to her because it was hers. But the project was ultimately shelved, and the disappointment landed as another message that her own desires didn't carry much weight. Then she chased a different kind of dream. By 30, Karen wanted love and a family more than she wanted another chart position. In 1980, she met Thomas James Burris. Friends described him as attractive and charming, and Karen seemed hopeful. The engagement moved quickly. A long engagement was discussed, then replaced by an August wedding plan that made some friends nervous. Days before the wedding rehearsal, the bottom dropped out. Burris revealed he had undergone a vasectomy before meeting her. Karen wanted children badly, and the news left her stunned. She felt betrayed. She immediately wanted to cancel the wedding and called her mother in tears. Agnes refused to let her. The invitations were out. Reporters were coming. People magazine would be there. Agnes told Karen, in effect, that it was too late to change her mind, that the wedding was on, and she would walk down the aisle. The wedding happened on August 31st, 1980. The photos were glamorous. The truth underneath was not. The marriage deteriorated quickly. Friends began to realize Burris wasn't as wealthy as he appeared, and that he was living beyond his means. A family friend later recalled that he began asking Karen for money, large sums, until it felt like her assets were being drained. Karen also confided fear about his temper and cruelty, and then came the moment that shattered whatever hope was left. When Karen talked about getting pregnant, Burris reportedly told her he wouldn't consider having children with her and called her a bag of bones. Her friend Itchy Ramon later described the marriage as the worst thing that could have happened to Karen. Karen's hope of becoming a mother held her in the marriage longer than she wanted to admit. The emotional toll was severe. By late 1981, she filed for divorce. It wasn't simply a breakup. It reinforced a belief she already carried, that love was something that eventually slipped away. By 1981, Karen's health could no longer be treated as a private rumor. In October, while the Carpenters were in London for promotions, BBC host Sue Lawley brought up rumors of anorexia nervosa on Nationwide. Karen denied it, insisting she was simply exhausted. When Lawley pressed further and the focus drifted toward weight, Karen grew visibly uncomfortable, and Richard stepped in to shut the topic down. The moment is painful to watch in hindsight because it shows how cornered she felt. She wasn't ready to name the illness publicly. She didn't want her body turned into a headline, and she wasn't prepared to explain something even the culture around her barely understood. Back in Los Angeles, Karen moved toward ending her marriage, and then she did something that should have been the turning point. She sought intensive treatment in New York. In January 1982, she relocated there and began seeing psychotherapist Stephen Levenkron, one of the few specialists widely known at the time. When Karen began treatment, she was dangerously underweight. Early on, she admitted to misusing medications tied to her eating disorder, including laxatives, a pattern Levenkron recognized from many similar cases. What stunned him was that she also disclosed taking thyroid medication despite having no thyroid condition, using it to try to force her metabolism faster. He confiscated what he could. Karen tried to cooperate, but she also clung to control. She built routines around the treatment that kept her feeling in charge, including long daily walks to and from sessions. Friends noticed how easily those rituals could undermine progress. They were watching her reach for recovery with one hand while quietly protecting the disorder with the other. Then came an episode that showed how distorted her self-perception had become. Karen asked to borrow a bikini for therapy. Her friend Itchy Ramon handed her one, and Karen stepped out wearing it as if everything was normal. To Itchy, it was shocking. Karen's body looked frighteningly thin, but Karen didn't seem to see what everyone else saw. The illness wasn't only in her choices, it shaped how she saw herself. In mid-1982, Levenkron arranged a family session. Karen cried, apologized, and seemed desperate for reassurance. Richard told her he loved her. When the therapist turned to Agnes, her mother couldn't bring herself to say the words. Itchy later described how brutal that was. Karen had been stripped down emotionally, and still her mother couldn't reach for her. After that meeting, the family pulled back from the treatment plan. Levenkron later said he received no calls from them while Karen was in New York, which he found unusual in cases like hers. The isolation didn't create the illness, but it left Karen carrying more of the burden alone. By the fall, Karen's body forced a crisis. In mid-September, she reported that her heart was beating funny, and she was dizzy to the point of being unable to walk. She was admitted to Lenox Hill Hospital on September 20th and placed on intravenous feeding. During the catheter insertion, doctors accidentally punctured one of her lungs, causing severe pain and delaying the start of feeding. Once the feeding began, Karen's body responded quickly. Accounts from that period describe her gaining weight rapidly in the first days. Visitors saw more energy and hope in her face. For people who loved her, it felt like she was finally coming back. Later that year, Karen returned to California. People around Karen remembered flashes that felt almost like a second life beginning. She ate more normally at Thanksgiving, sounded proud of herself, and talked about recording again. But recovery isn't only emotional, it's physical. Years of malnutrition can weaken the heart in ways that don't announce themselves until the damage is already severe. After Karen's death, her therapist spoke about what the autopsy revealed and what Karen had kept private: the use of a substance linked to purging that is known to be toxic to the heart. The active compound can accumulate in heart tissue, slowly undermining its ability to function. Karen's renewed eating and optimism couldn't reverse what had already been set in motion inside her body. Her story shows how illness can evolve. Even when she began to eat again, the fear didn't disappear. It simply found another place to hide. In the final days of January 1983, Karen Carpenter's life seemed, on the surface, to be turning back toward normal. She was preparing to finalize her divorce. She was making plans. She was talking with Richard about getting back to work. She was looking forward to ordinary, tender things, like visiting friends and meeting a new baby. On February 1st, 1983, Karen and Richard had dinner at Scandia, a restaurant they loved. They talked about music and a possible comeback. It was the last time Richard would see his sister alive. On the evening of February 3rd, Karen stayed at her parents' house in Downey. She set a coffee pot for the morning and prepared for the next day, which included plans like getting a manicure and signing paperwork related to her divorce. Then, early on the morning of February 4th, she collapsed. Paramedics rushed her to Downey Community Hospital, but she could not be saved. She was pronounced dead that morning at 32, and the news hit the public like a punch. The official cause of death was recorded as emetine cardiotoxicity due to, or as a consequence of, anorexia nervosa. In plain language, her heart was fatally damaged in the context of a long eating disorder struggle. The wider story became impossible to ignore. Here was a famous woman with a perfect public image, someone whose voice had soothed millions, dying from a disorder many people still treated like vanity or stubbornness. In the years that followed, Karen's death became a reference point in public conversations about eating disorders, and her family created the Karen A. Carpenter Memorial Foundation to support research and education. Karen's death landed at a moment when the public didn't have a clear framework for what had happened. People knew the word diet. They knew the idea of weight loss. Many did not understand that an eating disorder could be lethal, or that it could be driven by fear, shame, and control, rather than glamour. When someone as famous as Karen Carpenter died, the story broke through denial. The illness was suddenly visible, discussable, and terrifying in a way it hadn't been before. Levenkron later reflected on how difficult cases like Karen's can be, and he acknowledged that not every patient survives. Karen was the loss that stayed with him. The line is chilling, not because it blames anyone, but because it shows how fragile her body had become by the time she tried to climb back out. In the months that followed, Richard devoted himself to protecting her legacy and releasing work she'd recorded. A posthumous album featuring Karen's vocals, Voice of the Heart, was released in 1983, and later compilations continued to introduce her voice to new listeners who hadn't been born when she was alive. The music kept moving forward even when Karen couldn't. Karen's legacy, though, is not only caution, it's also the sound she left behind. If you listen closely to the Carpenters' best records, you can hear why so many artists have admired her. The controlled phrasing, the steady tone, the softness that still carries weight. She didn't need to overpower a song to own it. She made gentleness feel strong. In 2010, Rolling Stone included her in its list of the 100 greatest singers of all time, a signal that even decades later, people in music still recognize what she could do with a melody. And maybe that's the final heartbreak. The same tenderness that made her voice unforgettable also made her vulnerable in a world that rewarded perfection more than it rewarded peace. If you're watching and recognize some of these patterns in yourself or someone you love, it's worth talking to a qualified professional. Getting help early can protect a body long before the danger becomes visible. Karen Carpenter gave the world comfort through music. Her life is a warning about what can happen when comfort is something you give, but never quite believe you deserve.